Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU. Hello, everyone, and I just want to warn you, hold on to your seats, because we're gonna have such a candid, no holds bar conversation about the reality of supply chain and vendors and business owners and the powers that be, right? And the corporate sector and engagement and all of that good stuff with my dear good friend, Nadia Carmino. And she is the president, the owner, the founder, CEO, and just a magnificent mind. I mean, it's just amazing. I just enjoy every time we hop on a call and we're like, we're ready to we're ready to get things done, right? And I love the work that you do with Alliance One Management and Consulting, because what you are focused on and are just an advocate for, right, is to supporting firms and companies in diversifying their supply chain. Basically, all of the vendors and suppliers that provide them products and services so they can then run their businesses, right? And to really provide equal access. I just before we start this, I just wanted to say how crazy the way that we met, and I feel like I know you forever, right? We met like maybe 4 months ago when our when Kelly Burton, Dr. Kelly Burton, was participating on a panel. We were like furiously commenting, right? And she's like, you know what? These two need to meet and come together. And oh my God, it's been amazing to get to know you and to collaborate with you and to work with you. And thank you for coming on the show and having this conversation with me.
Absolutely, Sami. Thank you so much for being a catalyst for change and being a game changer, and having the courage to have these open, frank conversations, because they need to be had. And you are an inspiration to me, and just it's a testament to how we came together. And I believe that change will happen, but it will take many of our similar voices to make that happen. So I welcome the conversation today.
Yes, I think that the one thing that because that's how we met, right? Through Kelly's participation on a panel, and it was diverse business experts, right? And people that are business owners or entrepreneurs were on this panel. So and it was supposed to be about disrupting, right, business as it's being done currently, especially from the standpoint of supplier diversity, which is what really supports this idea of providing equal access to business owners of diverse backgrounds that are basically non-white Hispanic, right, into engaging with the big companies, and it's really a quota system at this point, right? Let's just be real about it. And so when we were listening to these entrepreneurs of color speaking, Kelly being one of them, it came to a point where she was the only one being quote unquote disruptive. And I was texting her, and I think you were commenting too about what is this thing about not voicing, like feeling like you need to shut down, this angst, right? That as an entrepreneur of color, you feel, and that we all feel it, right? When we're constantly faced with these barriers of equal access to opportunities. And so, did you feel that as well? Is that something that prompted you to also engage with Kelly and make all the comments that you were contributing to the?
Absolutely, Sami. To that point, I actually reached out to Kelly directly and said, thank you for having the courage to speak up about what we're dealing with here as it relates to multi-generational inheritance and entrepreneurship. And she acknowledged, I think, most profoundly during that session, and I believe it was with the Federal Reserve, Sammy, if I
Yes, it
recall,
was.
and it
Hmm.
was race in the economy, and being able to address the gaps. And it's not and it's no disrespect to the BIPOC or the POC community, but until we get to a place of equity as it relates to the Black and Latino communities, these are conversations that need to be deliberate and intentional about the communities that they're targeting, for this, concept of wealth building and economic empowerment. So, absolutely.
Yes. And the thing is, it's so embedded in the system, and we were talking about, I think that that's why we were introduced, right? Because Kelly was like, wait a second, let's bring this group of women that clearly, and that's the name of the podcast, right? I have something to say, clearly have a lot to say about this topic, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
about this notion that supplier diversity does not work, that we're talking about tier one, tier two, which means like the bigger, contractor with a company, like whether it's construction or IT or whatever, then subcontracts diverse, right? Diverse vendors or suppliers that can support and create bandwidth at a tier two, just for anyone that doesn't understand, right, what that means from a supplier diversity standpoint. And so it's like, it just doesn't work because it's all based on all of these layers of approvals and all of these layers of evaluation, and this inequitable access, right, to the decision makers, right, to the bigger budgets, right? It's like, oh no, no, you don't qualify for this. And also to having to jump through hoops, right? Just the fact that I need to be certified as a Latina entrepreneur is just like, freaking look at me. They're like, you need to prove that you're like, like I need to prove that I'm a
Yeah,
Latina entrepreneur when I just am, right? And so
correct.
all of these layers of obstacles or barriers that are really stifling, right,
Mhm.
the opportunities for certain communities to be able to build generational wealth for their families and deliver even to ourselves social justice. So what are your thoughts on those initial conversations and this idea of supplier equity instead?
So, Sammy, I can tell you that in order to address the barriers, we have had to have gone through the process. And so we were that case study that throughout the industries in which we serve, we were able to demonstrate that their processes did not work. And so we had to go through the process, and that took for some years, upwards
Mm-hmm.
of 5 years for some, to be able to prove to their executives. And I got to a point where none of this was working. We
Mm-hmm.
could not infiltrate a supply chain if our life depended on it. And so we together as a leadership team came together and said, well, who are governing these companies? Their boards, their CEOs. And therefore, if you remember when we first spoke, we went directly to the boards and to the CEOs and said, you made these commitments. You're not only making commitments publicly, but you're verbally, committing through promissory estoppels to addressing and progressing communities that are underserved in your supply chain and in your organizations. And a lot of organizations, Sammy, speak to diversity and inclusion, but they don't speak to equity. And that's an deliberate and intentional omission of,
Mm-hmm.
of addressing that, because unless we speak up, they will never address that. And so equity is within the supply chain. Show us the money, show us what you're spending with those communities year over year, and stop, these, I would say, corruption as it relates to grandfathered companies that are in the supply chain that you continue to grow their business millions and billions and $1 trillion, because you're buddies with someone at that company, right? These are things that I actually witnessed and I was made privy to 20 years ago. And so that's how I know it happens, right? And so being able to have these candid conversations and say to a board, you are put in place to govern the policy, the bylaws as it relates to equity, and governance, and making sure that it's a fair and equitable process for all. And so, someone said to me last week, well, I'm not my family, they didn't own slaves, they didn't own plantations, right? So why is it, and this was a white, individual, and said, well, why is it that, your community seems to be targeting my community? And I said, it's not a deliberate and intentional target. I think what it is more or less, you continue to uphold the policies and regulations that were put in place after the Nixon administration to continue to marginalize our community. Instead of reimagining and amending the policies and bylaws, you continue to uphold the processes by not acknowledging that they don't work for us. And
Right.
so this is
Mm-hmm.
where we have to be able to come together and say, through supplier equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
C3 and CE3, that we want to help organizations create more equitable and equal consulting opportunities for companies like yourself, Sammy, and
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, One, to be able to prosper in these supply chains.
Yes, definitely. And that's what it is, right? We call it supplier equity 3 because it's like it's yes, the equity, but it's also the engagement process, right? It's that access and also the experience overall. What does that look like? It's reimagining how these dynamics take place in the business world. And it's not only with the private sector, we're talking with government too. All of these layers of requirements, and not that that they're not valid. It's good to qualify, right? Individuals, but some of them, come on,
Yeah.
some of these criteria are put into place to really exclude some groups, and give a wide open door to others, and it's definitely based on race, without a shadow of a doubt.
And to that point, Sammy, I think, and we've all said it in various conversations, that the people who've created these policies and processes don't look like us.
Mm-hmm.
The people who continue to work in those areas that uphold these policies may look like us, but we recognize many are gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Oh.
And so we recognize that there is a level of performative posturing, as a colleague of mine in the industry calls it. And I think it's pegged perfectly, because the organization says something, but their processes don't reflect what they've said.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to work with corporations, and they have to stop talking and work with organizations like us at CE3 and execute measurable, equitable investing opportunities for the Black and Latino businesses, to increase the change, right? Because we're seeing the needle move minutely, but it's not enough. It's not enough to build generational wealth and inheritance for our children and our greats and our grandchildren going on, down the line. So the impact of wealth building has to be a collaboration between corporations that recognize that we may be from the underserved communities, but we bring a wealth of knowledge, and we can show up and we can deliver. And so that's really what it's about at this point for us. And we are at the onset, Sammy, as you know, of the end of fiscal 21.
Mm-hmm.
We are embarking on fiscal 22, where
Mm-hmm.
companies should have carved out significant funding for the underserved community, and deliberately going out there to solicit vendors like us to be able to invite us, be it through sole source engagements, be it through RFP process, to be able to now put their money where their mouth is, right? Like, that's really what this is about.
Yes, absolutely. And I just think that this notion that, but where are they? It's like we can't find, right?
Don't get
Talented
me
and
started, Sammy.
good, and I know, and good quality providers. I get that all the time. And I'm like, well, just ask me, what do you need? Right? And so
Exactly.
that's the thing. It's like it takes this whole notion of 6 degrees of separation applies also, right? In Black and brown
Absolutely.
communities. Just pick up
Absolutely.
the phone and ask, hey, I'm looking for a solid construction company, I'm looking for a solid IT team, right? that, and look also at the demographics of the communities that you're living in and say, wow, what's the business community look like? What does this business ecosystem, right, deliver in terms of diversity, different perspectives, right, different applications? Because the new thing might be right under your nose, in one of the Black and brown communities, or in a incubator somewhere, right? And it might be the solution to something that you need as a big corporate player. I want to just take a step back at the comment you made about the gatekeepers, because that's one of my pet peeves, girl.
No, it's one of mine as well. And in all honesty, it is not to insult, it is not to call out, but it really is to acknowledge why companies are putting people in place to uphold some of these processes. And the reality is they are gatekeepers. And
Yes.
like I said, I'm sorry that that's what it is, but we have to call a spade a spade.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting because just this week, one of the major parks here in Central Florida, one of their supply chain people that I've tried and tried, and then I gave up, right? Yeah, you learn to move on, right? But I thought, and he said, "Oh my God, you're one of us. Great." It says, "Can we meet?" And nada, 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 no response. And anyway, which is fine, is moving on to another opportunity. And I'm like, Jesus, thank you. You got him out of the way. Now I'm
Yep.
like this, anxiously waiting for who's gonna take that spot, right? Because then maybe, just maybe, there's a chance, right? That there's this opportunity for access depending on the person's background, their lived experiences, where they're at, and if they don't drink the Kool-Aid, right? And it's just a conversation. I'm not saying, give me the business. I just want to have a chance to just talk about what
Correct.
we do, but we just don't have that kind of access. And it's a shame. I used to go to a lot of in-person presentations too, sometimes as a speaker, and I try to always talk to people, after. But then it's funny when you see people that have more accolades, right, than one, which happens a lot too. And you're like, oh my God, then I'm the fan, right? I'm like, oh my God, maybe if I stand in this, I get to speak to this person, right? And see, and then they seem cool on stage
Hmm.
and accessible and down to earth and just very real. But the moment you approach, you could feel the wall, right? And
Absolutely.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh, yeah. And it's so disappointing, right? It really is disappointing.
And I'll piggyback on what you just said. Is gatekeepers, not only do I feel uncomfortable calling it out, but that's what it is. On their side, there has become a realization that they have been put in place as gatekeepers, and the level of retention for those people have been perpetual, right? Like, if they last a year after what's happened, it's a long time, because they also have recognized that that company has given them a title but zero power to actually execute on anything.
Mhm,
So, as much as that person in that role, Sammy, may want to talk to yourself and myself, they have not been empowered to do so, right? Because the
mhm,
purse strings are still being held by the CEOs, their executives, and the board, right? And
mhm.
unless and until policies and bylaws are changed and actually, given power to those gatekeepers, that's what's going to continue to happen. So, not surprised at all about that.
So I'm excited that we're working on disrupting, right, the status quo, on offering up an alternative, right?
Yeah.
That's more inclusive, that's more mindful, that takes away all of this superficial stuff, right? And really focuses on capacity, on bandwidth, on quality, on talent, on knowledge, on perspective, right? On how do you say, gusto too? There's something to be said about the infusion.
Kahunas.
I know,
Kahunas.
cojones, just call it what it is, right? Of just this um wanting, right,
Mhm.
to be hands on and participate in the building of the future, of our country, of building an economy where everyone can thrive, of being creative in that process, right? And also
Mhm.
creating a pipeline. I think that that's critical. It's just creating a pipeline also of youth, right? People that, are diverse. I mean, the majority of children in this country, 18 under, that's it. It's over. Give it another 20 years, and that's our workforce, and it's black and brown, right? And so, how do we model behavior, as business people, um, that are Latino, that are Black, that are Asian, that are Middle Eastern, Renee, right? And also that are Caucasian, that are Anglo, right? And want to create this sense of, okay, there's enough, right, opportunity to go around, and we need to really provide pathways, equitable pathways for those professionals and business owners that don't have a stake, in the future of America. And we're not waiting. We just want to get it done now, and just say, you're gonna have to hear me out. Knocking. I think it's brilliant. That you have the cojones, right, to call and reach out to and get an audience with boards and decision makers, and I do too, in my circles, and be that voice, right, that respectfully and gracefully but forcefully, right,
Mhm.
presents an alternative option. Are we ready to do this?
We absolutely are. And I'll tell you something. We have the local, the international stage as it relates to sustainable development goals, so the SDGs that have been committed to at the UN and
Mhm,
so many other international outlets, that we need to continue allyship. We need to
mhm,
continue to be resilient and to be relentless about doing this. But we need to come together like we all came together, the five of us, to
mhm,
bring our voices from the different communities in which we represent and to demand the fact that you have made these commitments and we're going to hold you accountable to that. Because in
mhm,
this country, Sammy, it's against the law to make commitments and not uphold those commitments. And when you sit on international exchanges and your stock prices are impacted, right? Those are things that people need to take a step back and think about, the type of words that are being used, the optics that are out there. And we need to figure, we're in a place where we need to feed all children, not just our children, right? We need to be able to recognize, to your point about pipelines. Alliance One has been, at the forefront of working with our clients to build those sustainable pipelines and build the mentorship within those pipelines, that it's perpetual. It's
mhm,
cyclic, it's perpetual, and it's ongoing, because the challenge is Black and Hispanic children. If it's not the doctors, the lawyers, the mechanics, there is not a place for them. And we
mhm,
have to be able to show them that there is a future. We need to inspire them, because they can look at you, Sammy. They can look at me. They can look at Kelly. They can look at, Jinja and Erica, and they can look out and say, you know what? I have people who look like me. I have entrepreneurs that look like me, are breaking down barriers. When we started, I mean, I'll speak for myself. There wasn't any faces like me.
mhm,
There weren't any faces like me in boards. We're breaking down those barriers.
mhm,
Um, there weren't places for us in C-suite CEOs.
mhm.
In this country, we still only have 3 Black CEOs in all of North America. That's astonishing given where we are today, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be able to figure out that, I say this quite often, all skin folk ain't kin folk.
Mhm,
However, there's a allyship and a vision that, as a Latina business owner and as a Black biracial business owner and as so many others within our network, there's so many synergies that align us together in the vision, wanting to make this a monumental time. And we will not have this time again, Sammy, right?
yeah.
Fast forward a year from now, we may not be at this place. And so we need to understand it's now for the change, and we need to pull together allies from the different sectors, industries that are maybe white, that are
Mm,
from the different demographics, that believe in equity, for all people, not just for the white community or, you know, other communities that seem to dominate, right? Because metrics are powerful. And when we look up and we see the metrics, they don't lie, right? 2
Mhm.
plus 2 will always equal 4, no matter how you say it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And one thing that I got to tell you that, once you start sitting on boards, right? Which started happening for me, several years ago, is when you start saying, espérate, wait a second. So this is how this shit works, right? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, and then you
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
more savvy, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
at the
Yes.
beginning I would just like observe, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I bring my soapbox, obviously,
Yeah.
but we need more representation in these spaces to be able to speak up. This is something that I was talking about just recently too, about, and actually, in the presentation that I gave, I don't know if I mentioned it with you about this today. I gave a presentation to the Hispanic
Yeah.
chamber here locally in Metro Orlando, to the Leads group, and it was in Spanish. And they asked me, what topic. I said, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, oh, whatever you want. And I'm like, oh boy, oh boy. Oh my God. They just gave it to me on a silver platter, right? And basically, I talked to them about entrepreneurship and activism, the two faces, right? Or the two sides of leadership in business. And I
Yeah.
told them, I've heard, especially in the last year, and a half, since the murder of George Floyd, right? That all of a sudden there was like this awakening, and all of this promissory, notes and
Yeah.
comments and letters and whatever, right? That now we're like, okay, so now pay up, right? Like, where are you now, right? Because we're going to hold you
Mhm.
accountable to all of these promises you made, corporate America. But in any event, and I've seen a lot of Latino businesses, big ones too, right?
Mhm.
Really bitching about the fact that when people talk about diversity, they only think about the Black community, and they're supporting Black, and I'm like, yeah, because you've been silent. You've been
Exactly.
silent all this time. You've been trying to pass, especially if you're fair skinned, right? Like me. Like a lot of
Mhm.
people get, you don't open your mouth, you don't advocate. Whereas in the Black community, they've been about civil rights from the get-go. You're a business
Yeah.
owner, you're in there, right? You're
Mhm.
really involved in your church. You're really advocating. You show up at the commission board, and
Mhm.
you run for office. You know what I'm saying? So there's this
Yes.
real, how do you say, at least that's my observation, right? I feel like a lot of business owners, yeah, they contribute and they support, but I see that a lot of Latino business owners are very meek, and they don't want to ruffle feathers, right? Because
Others.
they don't
Yes.
want to jeopardize, their business. And I say, scale slow, but stay true, right? To your people, right? To elevating others and to bringing everyone else along too. And so, anyway, that's just one of my pet peeves. It has to do with the gatekeepers too, that we were talking about, right? It
Mhm.
happens in the business community too. And so I just feel that's what I was talking about to all of these business owners, was about exercise your voice, exercise your leadership, and unite with other business owners that might not look like you,
That's
because
right.
that's where we will amplify, right? Equal access to opportunity. Sharing works, right? Collaborating works because we pool in together our resources, right? And our
Mhm.
voices, and we learn from each other. Like every time I talk to
Yeah.
you, I learn something new, right?
Yeah.
Um, and
Absolutely.
and
Likewise.
and that's the thing. So it's important to create these dynamics because they're healthy. Instead of fighting over the cookie crumbs, let's come together and say, no, this is not cool. This is not okay. And we need to change it. There has to be a better way. Let's pause, right? And
Mhm.
figure this out together. And with our input, please stop making assumptions about what's enough in terms of a contract, and what kind of bandwidth I have, right? Because I'm going to tell you something. If I get a humongous contract, I'll find the people to do the work,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And send me to that point. I've been asked, do we know business owners in this sector and that sector? And I'm said, yeah, absolutely. Ask us. And we'll tell you. We've created a list, and some of that list, you're part of that list with many others that say if we because of our master service agreements get opportunities that maybe we can't satisfy, we'll subcontract out to our vendor if that's what it is, if that's what it takes, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to lift and climb, right, Sammy? We have to
Yes.
be able to lift and climb. But I will tell you, this fight that we're fighting is not for all of us. It really is not, because Sammy, it becomes tiring knowing that we're fighting and not everybody in our own communities really understand what we're looking to do and the benefit of our voices and the benefit of our leadership. And so I say, to your point, we got to stop being satisfied with pledges and tears and promises and the ongoing conversation. For me, it's at a place where it's bullshit if we can't execute on change. And if you have a problem with how to do it, we're right here, Sammy. We created SE3 for this exact reason. We will help you, right?
Yeah.
But by saying we don't know how, it's not enough. Like, that is not going to fly anymore.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And so again, I'm so happy to have jumped on this journey, like walking this path with you and with Ginger and Erica and Kelly and whoever. We already made a list. Hey, if you're out there and you know us, you're on this list of entrepreneurs, on entrepreneurs that we know that have the cojones, right, to speak
Yes.
up and to
Yes.
become part of this advocacy for supplier equity, to change. And what does that look like? What does supplier equity look like? Let's craft a new way of doing this. And it's, again, establishing equal pathways, equity in terms of access, right, to decision makers. Again, not being stripping away all of these criterias or these checklists, right, and these hoops that we need to jump through to even have an audience. I mean, that's all we're asking for. Don't give us the contract. Don't give me anything. I want to earn it, right?
Correct.
But just
Correct.
give me the freaking audience to be able
That's right.
to show you, right? To strut our stuff, right? And to show you that we're fully capable of gaining the business and maintaining the business and growing the business, and that it's beneficial to them as well. What else would you like to weigh in on in this respect of supplier equity?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the strategies we start with some of our clients is we ask them to go through a full audit of their supply chain. And one of the things that I spoke about at the Orlando Business Journal's Diversity Awards this year was around when we used to be asked, well, we do have suppliers in our supply chain that are diverse. And I would say, well, what are the verticals? Like, what are the areas? And they would tell us, well, we've got catering services that we have, Black and Latina and diverse communities, business owners. And then we've got janitorial. And I said, no, we're more than that, right? We're smarter than that. And I'm not saying that that's not okay, but we need to not allow companies to polarize us in a demographic that they think we are. We need to be able to carve out our own destiny. And that is within all areas, be able to get access to all areas of supply chain. So what I would start out with is saying, you know what, when you take a look at wanting to diversify a supply chain, asking that organization to be an independent consultant to helping them audit their supply chain. And the metrics you'll get from that supply chain is going to be the number of suppliers in the chain. It's going to be the ownership of those companies, the number of dollars being spent. And I can tell you right now, the top 5 guys that are in the supply chains across all the industries, they continue to monopolize the industry. And so being able to call out, you know what, IBM, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, all these companies who continue to grow into the trillions of dollars, isn't that enough? Don't you
Mhm.
feel that you need to, like, a company has to really look at their books and say, is this okay? Right. And I'll tell you, sometimes, Sammy, organizations look at their supply chain after we ask them to do the audit and they're shocked. I mean, personally, I don't think they're shocked, but it's optics, it's performative posturing, Sammy. Let's call it what it is. But then they're like, oh, that's wrong, and we need to do something about that. Okay, we're here. We can help you do something about that. Let's start executing on strategies. Okay. So that's where I say, for me, it's really starts at the auditing of a supply chain for any organization.
Okay, so then and then that audit will unveil, right? The
Correct.
yes, exactly, the primary issues, or at the very least the low-hanging fruit, right? This is what you can do immediately, right? Because that's the other thing. I just feel like from talk to walk, it's like molasses. Jesus, help me.
Absolutely.
Oh
Absolutely.
my gosh. And it's like you've got all of the resources. You have
Yeah.
talented people, you have enough workforce, you have departments, you have money, you have all of these resources to just take action, right? And then you calibrate as you go along. But there's some some foundational steps that you can take to do better, right? And
Mm-hmm.
move the needle in the right direction, right? In terms of equity. And it's like, why? Why does it take so long to get from point A to point B? It's just so frustrating sometimes.
Well, one thing I'll say, Sammy, is that we have wonderful, absolutely wonderful allies and friends and friendships that have been built through advocacy and trying to move this needle. And I can tell you that when a company wants to make things happen, there's intentionality, and something that would normally take 2, 3 years to happen can happen once
Yes.
you've got that CEO sponsorship, once you've got that board sponsorship, and once you start putting their feet to the fire and saying, you're a publicly traded company, show us your books. Show us
Mm-hmm.
where you're spending your dollars, because I'm going to be relentless in asking, because you keep telling us no, we're going to ask you why. Prove to us why we cannot. And so that is where I can tell you, I received an email, a very, very inspiring email from an ally of ours, company group head, where she said to me, Nadia, thank you for your resiliency. You're being relentless of moving this needle. And I had to, in turn, say to her, thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for your sponsorship on the inside. Because we're trying to do this on the outside, Sammy, but we also have to recognize that we need those allies on the inside and work with them. And so it's that whole concept of what we talked about at the very beginning, of going out to those white CEOs and gaining their support and working with them covertly and through strategic, um, executable, strategies now to infiltrate the supply chains. But we need their guidance, we need their support, we need their wisdom, and we also need their leadership in wanting to do that.
Absolutely. And the idea is to also demonstrate the value, right? So I think
Yep.
that, this is not because it feels good, or no, it's because there's there's value in it, in engaging,
Absolutely.
right, with diverse suppliers. And it just impact, it's like a ripple effect, right? A domino effect in the good sense of the word, right? Because then it just promotes a thriving community overall. And if the community is becoming more and more diverse, well, there you listen, Nadia, this is all I have to say. I'm just ecstatic that we're working on this together, on just changing how procurement is done, and I can't wait to meet you in person. I can't believe that we're like on, sister to sister turns, and we live 20 minutes from each other, and we
Yeah.
haven't met in person yet,
Person
but
yet.
it's going to
Yes.
happen very soon. But that's what happens, right? With the busy entrepreneur. I mean, with the busy business owner that wants to change the world,
Yes.
and the way things are done, And so, one last word to kind of encapsulate, the essence of SE3 and supplier equity and our vision. How we wish for it to look. What does that final portrait look like in the end?
I would say continue to inspire our ecosystems and our networks, and especially the youth, Sammy, your son, our kids, and the future generations to be courageous, and to let them know that they have allies and support in us. Because, as per the final thoughts, an entrepreneur's journey, being from the communities in which we serve, is very taxing on our mental health and wellness. And so knowing that as we continue to be warriors in this, that we have to also take time for ourselves and being able to acknowledge that we need a break, because we need the Sammys, we need the Kellys, the Ginjas, the Ericas, the Nadias of the world to continue this work, and amplify it. But we're no good to anyone if we're not mentally healthy, and our families depend on us, right? And so my last final thoughts are stay well, be well, and continue to show up and be courageous. And so, Sammy, I would say as we end, I would like to thank you for inviting me to a healthy, and safe place to be able to voice and I often say this, the voice of the voiceless, because there's many people, Sammy, who feel the way we do, and don't have the courage to stand up and be those leaders and those warriors trying to fight through what we're dealing with right now. And that's what makes us leaders and game changers in the space. And so thank you for inviting me today. And I think optimistically encouraged by the fact that we continue to do this and we do it together. Right.
Yes, me too. I think that that's the what feels really good about it is that we don't feel so lonely.
Absolutely. It can be a lonely
Yes.
place. It can be a dark place.
Yes, it could be. It could be. Well, listen, I love you. I can't wait to see you. And
Yes.
I like that bit about the self-care. How about mojitos soon?
Oh, mojitos. Okay.
What?
Sammy.
I make that. I'm gonna
Sammy.
mess you up. I make the best passion fruit mojitos, and I was taught my friend Yvette taught me how to make them. So we're on, okay?
We're well. You know what? I'm just be it at a restaurant or be it at your homes. Well, we definitely need to do this, and I look forward to it. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for making the time to have this talk with me. Okay, love you, Mama.
Love you too. Take care, Sammy. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.